Barcelona Institute for International Studies. I'm also a member of GRITIM. And well, Professor Boubakri will present origin and impact of the migration crisis in the Mediterranean on the Maghreb and its Sub-Saharan and European neighborhoods, a view from the South Shore. Professor Boubakri is a senior professor. He's a doctor of geography and research supervisor at the universities of Sousse, Sfax, and Tunis in Tunisia. He has a long experience with teaching, research participation, and leading research projects and programs in different migration fields. He was the expert in charge of the coordination and facilitation of the workshop Migration and Mobility in the framework of the 2017 Forum of EU Civil Society Organizations Neighborhood South in Tunis and Brussels. Member of the panel of experts engaged by the European Commission for the Evaluation of Research Programs, Framework Program 7 and Framework Program 6 in the field of migration topics. He was visiting professor at Tampere Peace Research Institute in 2018, at University Sa' Foscari of Venice, Italy, University of Nice, France, University of Aga Khan in London, and University Poitiers in France. He was also research coordinator of an international program with an interdisciplinary team titled Le Maghreb et les nouvelles configurations migratoires. Please welcome Professor Boubakri, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I thought that if I thought that it will be so long to present me, I would write just some lines. Anyway, thank you very much for first, of course, for the IEMed to have invited me with the association of the GRITIM group of migration in the Pompeu Fabri University. Thank you for the organizer and for Elisabetta and Karina to have campaigned me in this to come in this trip, and of course Juan, for your moderation. First, apologize for my hesitant English. It will be not a good English, so apologize. I will. I choose this title, "Crisis of States, Migratory Crisis," because I think is that the migration context since 2 decades and mainly since 2011 is a political responsibility, is a political sense. That means that I think that states are at the origin, states of group of states are the origin of this migration crisis or migratory crisis. Why I choose the Maghreb as a region, as an area of focus of this presentation, because the Maghreb countries are in relation or close 3 minimum of area which are very affected by this crisis and by what we call the Arab uprising. Of course, you have the relation between or inside the Maghreb area between the countries of this area. Of course, in Maghreb, people consider that they are Arab and Muslims, and that's why there is a long history of relation with the Middle East. And when we call Maghreb, that means it's the west of the Arab world. That's why any situation which affect the Middle East affect also the Maghreb region. But we are, of course, Mediterranean and what I call not Sub-Saharan neighbors, but we are the neighbors of the country South Sahara. Because for me, when we say Sub-Saharan, that means behind the Sahara. And the historical relation between the Maghreb and Africa, South Sahara, are traditional and are very, very old. Anyway, as I said, in the city, I start with the situation today. In 2011, there were about 270 million of migrants, and a quarter of them are or were displaced people. That means refugees, asylum seeker, IDP, and stateless people. And the number of the refugees and the forced migrants exploded in the new millennium because there never been so many refugees in the world since the end of the Second World War. And there is a gradual, before the millennium, there were a gradual increase for decades, but from the new millennium, there is a fulgurating acceleration since the beginning of this new century, and today there is about 70 million of refugees. So this picture shows you how it explodes, and of course there is what we call a refugee arc from in Africa, South Sahara, and of course in Middle East, that means Syria, and which are the causes of these conflicts, of this situation, is the multiplication of conflicts, because we can add to the old area of conflicts, mainly in Africa. Since 2011, there is a new conflicts, and the new and the old conflicts cover a vast and continuous intercontinental zone from Africa to Asia, from the Middle East to West Africa via the Arabian Peninsula, the Horn of Africa, Central Africa, Sahel countries, and also, of course, the Maghreb region, mainly Libya. And for example, in the Middle East, you can look on the screen, the explosion of the number of refugees in, for example, between the last decade of the 20th century and the new decade of the new millennium. And of course, in the Middle East, two major conflicts complete the picture: the civil war in Syria since 2011, to which was added the resumption of the civil war in Iraq and the emergence of the former Islamic State since 2014. And for the Syrian conflict, you know that there is about 7 displaced people, 3 to 4 million abroad, and about 5 million inside Syria. But also, there is not only the conflict in the Middle East. Also in Africa, there is a new and old area of conflicts in Africa, such as Mali since 2013, Darfur, old conflicts, but it's continue now, the Central African Republic since 2014, and of course South Sudan, with the civil war in this new country since 2014. Here, till today, this country is divided between 2 areas controlled, the first one by the anti-Balaka group, dominated by Christian groups, and the Seleka, which is in majority Muslims groups. And of course, the violence and the destruction of this war is definitive, because when you are this kind of violence and destruction, nobody can come back, even if we call and even if we say that there is a peace period, there is a solution, political solution, and so on. And for South Sudan, just 2 years after the independence of this country, in 2011, a civil war breaks out in these young people, in this young country in East Africa. And massacres and destruction brought hundreds, till today, of thousands of refugees on the route of exile. Now, what happens in Maghreb area? So the Maghreb area is still, and first, is a departure zone. You have about 5 or more Moroccan abroad, and Morocco still is still a country of departure, about 6 million of Algerian, and about 1.4 of Tunisian. But also, the Maghreb is an area of destination for forced or economic migration from Sub-Saharan Africa in particular. And before 2011, Libya was the main destination of these migrations. And I will be back to Libya, because I will take a moment to focus in this country and the evolution of the migration context in this country. So in Morocco, refugees and asylum seekers, what we call adventurers, migrants in transit for Spain and beyond for Europe, meet these in this country. That means there is a lot of category of migrants in this country, forced migration, or what we call labor migration. And of course, the proximity of Gibraltar, of Canary Islands, and of the Spanish enclaves of Ceuta and Melilla, we call this in Arabic Ceuta and Melilla, Ceuta and Melilla, is one of the main factors of irregular crossing, of irregular migration and crossing the Spain by the sea, or, of course, by forcing the land. And you know that there is a lot of moment of violence, and in 2005, in 2007, in 2013, and till I think last year. And of course, this situation is pushed these people to leave, because you have, on one hand, violence from the security forces, and of course there is a latent racism and xenophobia from some side of the Moroccan society. So Tunisia lived in 2011 an unprecedented experience of crossover flows. First, as departure country of more than 30 young people living during the days and months following the revolution and the fall of Ben Ali. And I remember that in 2011, there were a lot of people, a lot of journalists. They call us, they come, they make interview, all that, and they ask why these young people who pushed Ben Ali to flee Tunisia, the day after the fall of the regime, they leave Tunisia, and they left Tunisia for during a lot of weeks till till April 2011. And there is two reasons. The first reason is that the trafficking and the smuggling networks are active, and it just when there is no security control on the border, the sea borders or in the land border to Libya, these criminal networks, they are active and they are being active very quickly. And the second is, I think, and we can say that they are previous. There is a provision of anticipation of the situation of Tunisia. A part of these young people don't believe in the future and the amelioration of the situation of their country. If they left so quickly, just, I said, the days after, that means they don't believe in this. And this is the first category, the first kind of flows from Tunisia to the Italian shores of Mediterranean. But in the same time, Tunisia was hosting country for migrants fleeing Libya when there were the NATO war against Gaddafi and against Libya. And during this 2011 crisis, Tunisia maintained an open door policy for those fleeing Libya and was the largest recipient of migrants and refugees fleeing this country. And there was three other category of migrants, of people who has fled Libya and joined Tunisia. If we add the first one of Tunisia who left, we have four waves, four category of migrants who cross over the country. So you have the Tunisian worker in Libya, and the number reached about 140,000 in January 2011. The 2/3 of them, they left Libya because the violence and the chaos after 2012 and mainly after 2014. I will be back for this. The second one of migrants who left Libya are Libyan nationals who fled war in their country to reach Tunisia, and there were about 700 people. And the Tunisian Ministry of Interior estimated the number more than this one, about 1 million of Libyan of entry. And the third category, a wave of migrants who fled Libya, is the national of third country, because this national, their country is not close Libya, and they joined Tunisia seeking safety, and also because they could not, as I said, reach directly their countries. And there were about 208,000 in this moment. So here is the pictures of migrants on the Libyan border from the side of Tunisia, and the majority of these foreign workers in Libya who fled this country, coming to Tunisia, were repatriated to their country. Here, for example, you have Bangladeshi in the airport of Jerba. And this wave, I said, of forced and irregular labor migration was the result of one of the most acute migration crises experienced by Tunisia. And they tested with this wave and this and this crisis, the Tunisian authority and the Tunisian householder including civil society organization, international organization, the national authorities, tested the response capacities and action of various actors and stakeholders in regard of the assistance and organization of relief of refugees who fled Libya within a context of poverty, of course, and insecurity. And even if Tunisia has managed to deal with this crisis not only by fairly welcoming these refugees, but also by ensuring the smooth running of one of the most, I said, massive operation of repatriation, but a lot of things and other obligations remain to be respected by Tunisian authority. It's not perhaps the framework to speak with us because I think, but in the paper I will write, I will speak about what is what are where, for example, Tunisia till today we have not an asylum home law, and the refugees the demand to have the statute of refugee are managed by the UNHCR office in Tunisia, not by the Tunisian authority. And it's one of the weak, the weak of the Tunisian management. I don't say political migration politically, but management of migration. So, what about the Libyan case? I call this the impact of the Libyan crisis on the African and Mediterranean neighborhood. Till 2010, Libya was a leading player on the African Mediterranean scene. And the Gaddafi regime used two decisive levers to dedicate and to strengthen this role: migration and oil, in parallel, in this, on two ways, on parallel ways. Because Libya was the first immigration hub on the southern shore of the Mediterranean. Before 2010, Libya is the biggest pole of immigration, not only, I think, on the south shore of the Mediterranean, but also in Africa. From some years is Ivory Coast and Côte d'Ivoire and South Africa are more biggest. But before 2010, Libya, there was about between 2 and 2.5 million migrants in Libya. And this country has, and the regime, Gaddafi regime, has made its migration policy as a fundamental component of its foreign policy and of its alliance in Africa and in the Mediterranean. And for example, before 2010, there is some portual platform of migration from the Libyan coasts, and the Gaddafi regime closed the eyes as a mean of pressure on Italy and on Europe. And but since the new millennium, economic interest linked to Libyan oil and gas partly explain the rapprochement between Libya and Western countries after years of violence and tension. There were the Berlin attack and the attack against Libya in 1986, the Lockerbie crime, and of course another explosion of French plane, what we call of light, what we call the ETA attack. And just after that, there were the UN embargo against Libya from 1992. And in 2003, Italy played a decisive, Berlusconi mainly, a decisive role in lifting the embargo in return for a change in Libyan migration policy. And 1 year after, Libya is announced as a strategic ally of the European Union in the fight against irregular migration. So if the embargo was left, it was not for the beautiful airs of Gaddafi, but to to ally him to the fighting of the migration, the irregular migration. And in 2008, Libya and Italy signed the Friendship and Cooperation Treaty, and the Article 19 of this treaty is reserved to the fighting of the cooperation between to fighting the irregular migration. And irregular migration as was considered as a crime, like, for example, drug traffic and international crimes. And in 2011, there was the NATO war against Libya and the fall of the Gaddafi regime. So the question is how the Libyan situation influenced the migration and the migrant conditions. In 2011, mainly most Sub-Saharan migrants was between two accusations. They were accused as to be the mercenary of Gaddafi, and from the side of the Libyan authority and the Libyan regime, they were used as a mean to by pushing them to leave Libya. Gaddafi made a tentative to make pressure on Italy and Berlusconi to not be allied with the NATO preparation to have the UN Security Council for resolution. And that's why we can consider that one of the consequences, and which is continued till today, is that migrants, mainly from Sub-Sahara, they are and they were and they are still victim of abuses, of violence, of murder, and of course trafficking. And of course, the consequence is the reaching the European coasts. And for example, in 2015, there were a report of Amnesty International, which described with details abduction and extortion by traffickers and criminal groups with sexual violence along the smuggling routes, abuse and persecution on account of religion abuse in immigrant detention center in Libya. And Libya, perhaps some of you listen about this affair of slave markets in Libya, and today with the new year in Libya, we don't think that the situation of this migrant can be better. I think it cannot be better, and of course it cannot be. With the conflict between the East groups of around Haftar and the Occidental groups around the government, which is recognized by the international and by the UN. And in 2017, there was an affair. The Italian government tried to renew the application of the Treaty of 2008. And they launched some operation and of training of coastal guards in order to fight the irregular migration from the Libyan coast. Why? Because from 2014, there is a resumption of the conflict. There were two quiet years after 2011, 2012, and 2013. And after that, there is a new civil year from 2014. And the consequences of this of the second, because now we are in the third the third step of the civil war in Libya from last March 2019, with the attacks of the Haftar army towards the Tripoli and the west of Libya. I said that from 2014, Italy tried to allow to the Libyan government to control the departure from the Libyan coast. But in the same time, he gives training, he gives money, the government gives a lot of kind of support to the Libyan authorities and to the Libyan militias and armed group. And this time there is the flows continue to arrive to Europe. So they said, why not giving the money which migrants give to the armed and the militias? Why not giving them this money direct to this armed and militia group to control? And there is a fake news or right news, but we call that the Italian government paid about 5 million euro to one of this group, the Daesh group, to stop this the migration. And when they give this money, there is no departure. But in the same city in Sabratha, it's in the western coast of Libya, near the Tunisian border, there is another group who said, where is my part of this cake, if you want? And there is a big battle in Sabratha, and the result of battle that the second group pushed the first one to leave Sabratha, and they found, I'm not sure of the numbers, but they found a lot of migrants who were kidnapping and in homes, in garage, in all kind of space in Sabratha and in this and around Sabratha. And for example, the United Nations told about 8,500 migrants who were kidnapped in this area. But we call about Libya, but Libya is one of the area of departure. And here I made a cross exploitation of the data collected by the Frontex agency And as you look here and you see that by comparing the participation of the three basins of the Mediterranean in these flows, in this flux. And you know that the Mediterranean is divided in three basins, the western one, the central one, and the oriental one. And as you look here, the eastern Mediterranean is, for the 11 years, is the most important in participating in these flows. And of course, the years after 2014, from 2014 to 2017, the year where there is the biggest number, more than 1 million, is 2015, and there was the year where we have the biggest number of Syrian refugees, which they reached the European coast, the European shores, through Greece mainly. But I tried to understand how is the participation. And as you look here, is in percentage, you look the Eastern Mediterranean is, from all over the period, is the most important area participating in this migration, in these flows. And there is just from the last year that Spain emerged as a country of departure. And here I tried to add to cross the period before 2014 and after. And as you look that, for example, in the second, in the second table, I don't know how, comment on peut, faut les flèches. Anyway, for the second table, you saw that the Eastern Mediterranean participate in about 60 to 65 of the whole landing on the Mediterranean shores, and for the Western Mediterranean, it's very, very little, except since 2018. Why? Because the fighting and first there is the treaty between and the agreement between Turkey and the European Union. That's why the participation of the Eastern Basin is less than the first years. And in Libya also, there is two factors which explain that there is less number than the number of is, for example, in 2018 is just some dozen of thousand, comparatively up to the period before. There is about 700 in 3 or 4 years, from 2014 till 2017. And in the third table, you look that the Eastern Mediterranean participate to about 80%. That means that the period from 2014 to 2017 is the moment where there is a big number of migrants who reach the Italian the European coasts, and it's the same for the central Mediterranean, because you have 75 for this area. So why there is a so big number? As I said, perhaps if you look in the first, I forgot to just focus on the number of migrants you have for all the period in 11. That's why I said in the beginning of my presentation, I said that there is this explosion of the number, that in 11 years you had 2.5 migrants reach Libya and reach Europe, and this is very, very sensitive evolution for Europe and also for the Maghreb area and for the people of this area, and of course for the migrants themselves. And why I said that in the beginning of the presentation, I said there is a responsibility of political responsibility, because with the Libyan conflict, if you say if you look for the arms flows and routes, they are from Libya to the other countries, and you look for the migrant conflict are in the opposite direction. That means that the responsibility of the NATO countries and alliance are very, very clear here. And just after the fall of the regime, all the area around Libya and also in South Libya was burned. And you have, for example, what we call the Sub-Saharan arc. That means the African brigades of Gaddafi left Libya with weapons and fighter in direction towards Mali, towards Niger, Sudan, and Chad. And there is inside Libya clashes between the Tubu tribes and the group and what we call the Arabs group Beni Sliman around Sabha in the south, and in the area of what we call Fazan, which is close the Chadian border. And since this date, the whole area is still not stabilized or secure, because till today and from 2014, a little bit between 2011 and 2012, but since 2014, this area is very, very destabilized, and there were hostage attacks in hotel and restaurant, tourist hotel in Mali, in Ivory Coast, in Burkina Faso, in Chad, in Cameroon, now in Nigeria. And there were also the Malian war, where the first attack of this group outside Libya was what we call the National Movement of Liberation of Azawad, of the Tuareg group, and they attacked the North Mali, and they controlled for 1 year north of Mali till the center of the country. And in the same time, there were an activation of what you call the jihadist groups in this area, such as the Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, or the Unionist Justice movement in West Africa, and of course Boko Haram. So what about the European Union? I told you about Libya, about Tunisia, about Middle East, about the country South Sahara, but what about the European Union and its state members? This countries and the European Union adopt a new policy with the evolution of the situation based on the reduction of departure. This was since 2011. Even the declaration, they said, we support these countries, we are here, we gave assistance, they are very, very happy with the democracy transition in Tunisia, but the deep and permanent policy is to stop and to close the ways and the door to this migrations flows. A part of them, as I said, are the consequences of global policies, economic policies, globalization in these countries, but perhaps more than the half of the numerous consequences of this migration, and more than the half of the factors of this migration are the conflicts following the war in Syria and in Libya. And as I said, with Libya, European Union and Italy mainly, they renewal the application of the Treaty of 2008 by training of the Coastal Guard also. And the outsourcing of the European policy and the European control of external border were pushed and applied not with North African countries, but also to the south of Sahara with some means. And perhaps you listen about the European Union Emergency Trust and Fund for Stabilizing Africa. Because in the declaration, the public declaration, they said that, of course, we can arrange the consequences of the conflicts, but in the same time, there is a deep factors of this migration. But when you look for the amount and the funds which are reserved to this policy, you will say that 90%, I don't exaggerate, 90% of the funds are reserved to the security control and to settle what we call a spot control in the countries of located in South Sahara. I mean Niger, Mali, Sudan, of course, and they continue to push the European Union, I mean, to push Morocco and Tunisia to accept what we call the mobility partnership. The mobility partnership is an agreement with this country, and when the condition of this agreement that help is conditioned to a good control and a good cooperation in the outsourcing of the European control of migration in this country. And of course, for example, in Niger, you have this European program to fight them, and here it's called transportation of irregular migration is criminalized. I translate quickly this. In a country and in the region where the mobility and the displacement of people for economic reason or for migration is one of the main activity and source of incomes of the population. And the consequence of this that for example, in Agadez town, there is a deep crisis, economic and social crisis, because no one can transport and take someone from a country to country, because everybody is accused to be a trafficker of migrants. And I think to conclude my presentation, perhaps one of the aspects of this consequence is that by pushing these countries to manage themselves these flows of migrants, because European Union stopped and closed the door to on the external borders, and for example, during the last year, the tension between the Italian government and the NGO of saving the migrants in sea, the rescue in sea. And today, you know that these organizations, humanitarian organizations, they cannot continue to rescue the migrant in sea. And the consequence is that the population and the migrant who needs protection, they cannot have this protection. In Libya, with the new step of the war, the civil war, in the countries where there is the conflicts and where conflicts continue today. And you know that, the international protection is an obligation for every country, for every regional organization, and for all the partners of the Africa. And another, and it will be the last one, another consequence of this, that this policy, European policy, pushes the North African country to close their door towards the African countries. And in the same time, for a lot of decades, from the independence of the African countries, there were a cooperation and economic exchanges and technical cooperation between, in one side, the African countries, and the other side, the countries south of the Sahara. What is the consequence? That the North African countries are obliged to apply the same policy, the same migration, European migration policy, which European Union apply for on this country. The North African country, they apply the same migration policy towards the nationals of the migrants of the Sahara. And another consequence is that with this policy, the regional cooperation in West African community, in Central African community, economic community, because one of the agreement, of the article of the agreement, that the free movement inside this economic community, like COMESA, like the SENSAD, etc. So I think that today I am not very, very optimistic. Why? Because I think that the step of the Libyan, and I'll finish in 1 minute, so the new step of the Libyan crisis, it will be more dangerous and with more risk for Libyan people itself, and also for migrants who are in Libya, because Libya, even there is the war, even there is the violence, even there is trafficking, they can work there. They can send money to their family and to their community. So if you have a lot of Sub-Saharan migrants in Libya, they prefer go in Libya with all this risk because they can send money to their community. Think that they cannot do in Tunisia because Tunisia is very close with these migrants. Also Morocco, there is 2 regularization of migration of migrant in Morocco, but from 1 year or perhaps 2 years, if you look to the NGO, Moroccan NGO and international organization, you will say that the Moroccan policy is not better than the Tunisian policy towards migrants or the Italian policy. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Boubakri, for your presentation. And now, if you agree, we can collect 3-4 questions from the audience. So whoever would like to